All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. My name is Shawn Rogers. I am the product manager for our Nebula, our cloud managed solution, cloud management platform. So as we go through today's webinar, if you have any questions, send them in using the Q&A part of the Zoom interface, and I will get to those when I have a second. So as today's presentation is kind of a tips and tricks and best practices and sort of features and things in Nebula that people often overlook or fail to set up properly. We've added a few new slides since the last time I did this presentation based on feedback. And we'll continue to evolve this presentation as we get more and more feedback from you as you use Nebula. So we're going to start off by talking with how Nebula, your customers, your sites should be organized in Nebula. So everything in Nebula is organized using organizations and sites. So as a general rule here, you may have, sorry, I apologize here. My dog's distracting me, my bad. So basically you've got organizations versus sites. So organization is your top level, sites are underneath that. So all sites have to be part of an organization. As a general rule, every one of your customers should be their own organization. And in some cases, you may have more than one organization. Some ideas here is, splitting up your organizations by individual franchisee and then sites by franchise location. So when it comes to licensing, the Plus and Pro Pack licenses are going to be done on an organization basis. So if you're new with Nebula, Plus and Pro are optional licenses that unlock additional features. And in order to convert an organization from the standard free version of Nebula into a Plus or Pro organization, every device in that organization needs to have a valid Plus or Pro Pack license. Now, a key thing here is organizations can only have one owner, and there are certain features that are only available to that owner. An org itself can have an unlimited number of sites underneath it. One thing that happens here is oftentimes we will have customers that only need, a Plus or Pro Pack features on certain locations for their customer. So in that case, what you would do is you would take your customer and you would split them into two or more organizations. Those sites that need Plus or Pro Pack features, you would put in one organization. Those that don't, you would put into a different organization. And it is possible to mix and match products at a physical location across multiple sites or multiple organizations. Now, some features which require coordination between the devices aren't going to work, but in general, the products will work just fine that way. So for instance, maybe you only need a Pro Pack for your access points. So you may create an organization that just has your access points in it, and then a separate organization with your switches and firewalls where you don't need Pro Pack features. And of course, you can always split up your customers. If you have a large number of sites, you can split those customers up into multiple orgs, based on where they happen to be or some other sort of defining characteristic of that org. When it comes to creating sites, we do have a bulk site creation tool. So it makes it really easy if you've got a customer with a lot of different sites you want to set up. It makes it really easy to quickly create a bunch of new sites. You can clone settings from your existing sites. So for instance, if most sites are going to have the same features, you create one, get it configured how you want, and then you go in and clone it to create a bunch of new sites. We also have the ability for you to download an Excel spreadsheet. And in that Excel spreadsheet, you can create new orgs and you can assign not new orgs, new sites, and you can assign devices through the Excel sheet into each of those sites how you want them distributed. So it's really easy. You can set things up in the Excel file and then simply upload it into Nebula, and it'll create the sites and import the products based on what is in that Excel file. So when it comes to Nebula administrators, each organization in the free version of Nebula can have 5 admin accounts. and with the Pro version, an unlimited number of admin accounts. And when you're setting these up, you're going to split these based on what access they have access to. So you will have a owner. So again, you can only have one owner per organization. And that owner is going to be whoever creates the organization to start. The next level you have is a full settings here. So you can assign full access, read-only access, or none. And then that will basically give this level of access across all sites underneath that organization. If you want to have admin users that only have access to certain sites, say for instance, you're giving the IT guy at a certain location access to Nebula so he can do some configuration or so he can do some monitoring, you would set the org level settings here to none. And then you would be able to go in on a site-by-site basis and then set site level access. We'll go through that a little bit more detail here. So again, the owner is whoever created this organization, and the owner has some access to some settings that otherwise you don't have access to. For instance, if you want to transfer licenses between organizations, that can only be done by the owner. So a very common problem we run into here is that you have multiple admins. Some of your admins create some orgs, some other admins create other orgs, and then somebody leaves the company. Now you lose access to those organizations. So just as a best practice, whoever you should be the owner of someone who's going to be there a long time, whether that's you or one of your top admins, these should be the owner. These should create all of the organizations. And you can create blank organizations and then let your other admins take them over and configure them when it becomes time. So I highly suggest if you're an owner to go in there, and if you've got a lot of customers, go ahead and create a bulk creation of orgs. Just don't configure anything, don't activate any of the trials, and they'll be there for your admins to set up when you have a customer that you need to pull into Nebula. But if you don't do that, and we will get to it here on a future slide, it is possible to transfer org ownership. It's pretty easy to do through the Nebula interface, and I will go through that. So when you grant an admin full access, they get full settings access to all sites under that organization. So they can basically change just about any configuration and save it in Nebula. You have the ability when you're creating a full admin to also delegate owner's authority. So that gives them some extra ownership level access. But again, there are certain features that you must be an actual owner to do. So some of the examples here, delegated administrators. So basically admins that have been delegated owner's authority cannot delete organizations. They cannot remove the owner. They cannot delegate owner authority to other admins, and they cannot transfer ownership between owners. So read-only, I think that's pretty straightforward. It gives you access to all of the sites in that organization, but at a read-only level, you cannot change any configurations. And then there's none. So if you want somebody to only have access to a couple of sites, generally what you would do is as an admin here, you would designate them as none initially. And then you would go in and configure access using the site settings here. So if you give them an owner and full, just gives you ownership in full. Read-only and none will then open up. If you designate an admin as a read-only or none, it will open up a second menu that allows you to control access on a site-by-site basis. And it's very similar. So then you can go in on each site and determine whether they have full access, read-only access, monitor-only access. So this is a different level here. This provides them, so read-only basically lets them see all the settings, but it doesn't let them change them. Monitor-only only gives you access to the monitor pages in the Nebula interface. So you can't see the configurations, you can't modify the configurations, you can only see the data that shows up on the monitor parts of the Nebula. We have an installer access, which gives you the ability here to basically access our mobile app, lets you see the dashboard, lets you add devices, lets you edit the device detail page. You can add and remove Nebula devices, but you can't do any configuration or see any of the configuration. And in this latest update that we just pushed out, we have now added the ability to let you create admins that automatically expire after a certain period of time. So for instance, if you're using contract installers, you can set them up as an installer at just the site they're going out to, and you can have it automatically delete their credentials after a certain period of time. So if, for instance, the install will be done by the end of the month, you can simply, when you create the admin account here for them, you can set it up to automatically expire at the end of the month, so you don't have to remember to go in and remove their access later. And then we have something called a guest ambassador. So if you are doing public hotspot and you are using our vouchers, which are something that's only part of the Pro Pack, it gives you access to generate, modify, and remove accounts or voucher codes from the public hotspot. So for instance, if you have a customer of yours, they have a large office building, they get guests who come in, vendors, suppliers, whatever it may be, you may give this access to the administrative assistant or whoever's working that front desk, so they can create or remove accounts for those guests to give them temporary access to a guest network in the building, for instance. So setting the administrator access here, here's what you're going to see when you go in to create an administrator. You will be prompted to put in their name. You must put in a valid email address, and then you can see there's a drop down there for organization access. So you can choose what you want them to be. And as you can see there's a checkbox to designate ownership authority, assuming you're giving them full admin access. And then you can automatically activate them or wait for or send them an email that they then must activate themselves. Now, instead of full, if you choose none, it will give you this little extra box here at the bottom. So you can see everything's the same, except for now there's an add button that's been added here at the bottom left. When you click that add button, it gives you a drop down where you can choose what site you want them to have access to, and then a drop down where you can choose what privileges you want them to have access to. And so if you're giving them access to multiple sites, you just simply, after completing the first one, click the add button again, and so on and so forth until you've configured all the sites you want them to have access to. Now, for transferring organization ownership, it's pretty easy to do. A key thing here when you're doing this is whoever the new owner is going to be, you need to add them as an admin first. So you cannot transfer ownership to somebody that doesn't have an activated admin account on that organization. It's pretty easy to do. You just go under organization-wide in the menu, configure administrators, add the new admin if they aren't already an admin for that site. And then you can go in here and go to transfer. So basically you're going to go in there, you're going to click the change owner button. You're going to select, using the checkbox here, the new account that's going to become the new owner. You're going to go ahead and it's going to pop up a little acknowledgement box asking you, are you sure that's something you want to do? And make sure you understand that once you do this, it cannot be reverted. It is a done deal. You click yes, and it is done. You can also transfer devices between sites, and if you are an owner, you can transfer licenses between sites and organizations. It's done the exact same way. We'll go to organization-wide. You'll go to the license and inventory section of that menu, and then in case of devices, you would go to devices. Check the devices that you want to transfer. Click on the Actions button. And you can see here it gives you the option of changing the organization, changing the site, or simply removing them from the organization itself. And so in this case, we're changing it to a new organization. So it will pop up here, this screen here, where you get a drop down allowing you to select which organization you want it to go to. And you can also choose whether or not to keep the device's interface settings the same or automatically adopt what's already in that new organization. And it's the same thing when it comes to licenses, only instead of the devices tab, you go to the licenses tab, and the process is basically exactly the same. Select the license you want to transfer, click the Actions button, transfer license, select where you want to transfer it to, or select the device you want to transfer it to, and you're done. So again, in order to use Plus Pack or Pro Pack, all devices must have a valid license assigned to them. So with Nebula, we have the ability to give you a 30-day free trial of the Pro Pack features. And something that happens often here is people will activate the trial when they're first setting up their organization. It's part of the setup wizard. And then once that 30-day trial is expired, you do need to go in and activate Nebula. And this is also something we run into a lot with people. They've added the licenses, but they don't realize they need to activate them. And the interface isn't as clean as it should be. So this is what we're doing here. We're going to walk you through basically what you need to do to activate Pro Pack. And it's the same process for Plus Pack. So you're going to go to organization-wide licenses and inventory and go to overview. And in that first tab there, there's this organization status. It will show you if your site is currently Base Pack, Plus Pack, or Pro Pack. So if we are Base Pack, it will look like this. It'll say Base Pack here, and you will have two buttons, Actions and Purchase License. If you have three buttons here, well, I'm explaining this poorly. How should I split this? So basically, if you've already assigned and have licenses assigned to each device, you will have a third button here, which says upgrade. If you do not have the button that gives you the option for upgrade, it means that you do not have licenses assigned to all of your devices. Now, if you don't own licenses or don't have enough licenses, you can click the purchase license button here to purchase it through our online store. If you're one of our reseller partners, you'll probably get better pricing if you buy through distribution, but it'll take a day or two to get the licenses sent over to you, and you can import the licenses there. If you have the licenses, but they haven't been assigned, you can simply go to either the devices or licenses tab, and there's ways through those tabs to go ahead and distribute and assign the licenses. Assuming you do have enough licenses and they've been assigned, you will now see three buttons here. So again, we're still in Base Pack. And now we've got this third button that says Upgrade Now. So once you have that Upgrade Now button, you simply need to click it. It will pop up a warning here letting you know once you click yes, that it will automatically activate those licenses. Click yes. It will activate the licenses and automatically convert the organization to a Plus or Pro Pack organization. So as I mentioned before, we do have trials of almost all of our different licenses. So both our Nebula licenses here, as you can see, we've got a Nebula Pro Pack trial, a MSP license trial, and then for our security appliances, we've got various different UTM bundles, gold bundles that you can trial out. Our secure Wi-Fi trial. For our access points, we have Connect and Protect, which is a security license just for the access points that gives them sort of like UTM-like features. So all of these can be done here. So again, you just same tabs here, organization-wide license and inventory, and you just go to the trial tab. And then you click activate to use and activate those licenses. I believe all of them are currently 30-day licenses for you to trial. Now, if you trial the Pro Pack, either by activating it on this screen or activating it during the setup process while going through that setup wizard for creating a new org, your organization will continue to show itself as a Base Pack organization. So the trial is not treated as if it's a 30-day license. The trial is its own separate thing. So if you go to the license and inventory page and go to overview, it will continue to show you our Base Pack. And you will, on every page, continue to have this little banner letting you know that you are using the Base Pack of Nebula. So to check to see if your trial is active and to see how many days are left on the trial, you go to the Trials tab. As you can see here in this screenshot here, it shows you that the current trial is in progress. And it tells you when it's going to end. So that's where you keep an eye to see if it's going on. This causes a lot of confusion for people because they'll activate the trial during the organization creation wizard. And then they see the banner that says they are, using the base version. They go to overview, it says they're using the base version. So this is where you have to go to see if you've got the trial active and to see when it's set to expire. And it works the same way for all of the other trials that we offer through Nebula. Moving on from that, hardware locking. So by default, the Nebula behavior is if you have access to the QR code that is on the belly of the product or on the box that the product came in, the assumption is you have ownership of the hardware itself. This was something that was added to Nebula a few years ago based on requests from our larger MSPs, where it's normal to remove hardware from one site and move it to a second site. So oftentimes, a user calls in and says, hey, my Wi-Fi is not working well. One of the first steps a lot of our MSP customers do is they swap out the hardware to see if that solves the problem. If it doesn't, they don't send another unit on site to swap it back. Instead, they put that unit back in the inventory and use it in another install. So this way, it's really easy. Your installer guys, when they go to install it, they simply scan that QR code. Doesn't matter if it's a new product in box, doesn't matter if it's something that was pulled from another location. They can scan it, add it to a new organization or a new site, and away they go. The downside of this is, somebody, normally one of your customers you'll leave the box on site, or they'll be messing around with the hardware that's been installed. They'll see the QR code, they'll scan it, and they'll take ownership of it through Nebula. So you can turn off this feature. It's pretty easy to do. You do it on a per org basis. So you simply go to organization-wide manage in the Nebula interface, organization settings, and it's called device ownership takeover. Simply enable that, and it will prevent people from being able to transfer those devices out of the organization unless they are an admin of that organization. Another recent new feature we added is something called alert aggregation. So the way Nebula by default has worked is if a device, based on how you've set it up, goes offline for a certain period of time, it sends you an email or push notification through the app. The downside of that is oftentimes the reason the device has gone offline is because power has gone off or the internet has gone down. And there may be dozens or hundreds of devices in that building which now has no power or no internet connection. So you've now got dozens or hundreds of devices going offline, pushing out notifications. So we've now given you the ability here to aggregate those alerts. So you go to site-wide, configure alert settings, and you can enable what we call alert aggregation. So instead of getting an alert for every single device, it instead is going to group them up. So instead of getting 100 messages saying an access point has gone offline, you'll now get one message sent out to you that says 100 devices have gone offline at this particular site. Static DHCP. This is an area where we get a lot of questions, and it doesn't make it any easier that there's two different types of static DHCP in the Nebula interface. And there's two different ways of getting to them. So you can go to the client page, which is going to show you all of the client devices on your network. And it will show you whether they're wireless or wired and what their current IP address is. If you select one of those client devices and go to policy, you can choose reserve IP, and they will continue to get that IP address every single time they get a new IP through DHCP. So every time they request a new IP through DHCP, they will get that same IP address they had before. It's an easy way to do it, but it only works if the device has been or is currently connected to the network, and it doesn't let you specify the IP address. It's just whichever one it currently has. Now, if you want to give people a specific static IP address, or you want to set it up for devices that haven't yet been plugged in, instead of using the client page, you go to the interface page for your firewall gateway, whatever you happen to be using. And there is a static DHCP table there where you manually type in the IP address and the MAC address for the device, for each device. So it's really flexible. You can decide which IP each device is going to get. The downside of doing it this way is you have to manually put in that MAC address for the device. So you're going to have to look it up or copy and paste it from a different page in Nebula in order to set that up. And this page here, if I remember correctly, this overrides this. So another thing we get is a lot of questions about what ports need to be open. So basically, no ports need to be open for Nebula to work, but you do need to allow traffic out from your network. So if you're one of those people with a really locked down policy on what traffic can go out from your network out to the internet, these here are the ports that Nebula uses. So netconf, which is the industry standard protocol we use for our hardware to communicate to the cloud, it requires TCP ports 6667 and 4335 to communicate with the Nebula cloud. If you want to access the Nebula portal, or you want your devices to be able to upgrade their firmware or access our cloud-hosted user authentication server, you need to allow our devices to go and send traffic on TCP port 443. We need to allow UDP port 123 for time syncing. So this is very important with Nebula. This is very important for your security. Basically, in order for a lot of encryption to work properly, the device time needs to be synchronized essentially with what the server time is. So it's very important that Nebula devices get access to an NTP, to our NTP server here. And then lastly, for NAT traversal and stuff like this for VPN, UDP 4500 and UDP 500. If you're not using VPN services, you can leave those ports closed. So again, you don't need to open up ports inbound, but you do need to allow the Nebula devices outbound traffic on these ports. Another area where we've gotten a lot of questions is the power output screen in the Nebula interface. So when you go into Nebula and it lets you set the output power, this is the maximum output power. It is not the power it will necessarily be broadcasting at, just what the peak power is. So the actual power output of your access points is going to depend on the hardware. So, you know, if you've set it to 30, but the hardware only supports, say, 23 dBm, it's only going to be able to broadcast at 23 dBm. The other has to do with what channels you are using. Both 5 and 6 gigahertz have different maximum powers that they allow based on certain channels in the band. So some channels in 5 gigahertz will let you use full power, some will not. So we will automatically cap output power based on what channel they are using to broadcast on. 6E products in the screen that shows you the current output power from the device. I think we still have this issue in the Nebula where it incorrectly reports the actual output power. That was a chipset driver issue on those 6E products, and I don't think the chipset vendor has fixed it. So multiple SSIDs. So a key thing here is if you're using multiple SSIDs, you should be putting them on different VLANs, right? There's really not much point of using multiple SSIDs if they're not going to be on different VLANs, but we have run into this where users set up multiple SSIDs, a guest network, a sales network, and a warehouse network, an admin network, admin SSID, and then they're all on the same VLAN so they can all see each other. So generally, if you're using multiple SSIDs, it's because you're trying to create different networks with different access to local resources. So you're going to want them each on their own VLAN, and you're going to want to have VLAN-aware switches and gateway. We do have a cool feature here, which is the ability to do AP-hosted DHCP. So even if your gateway, you've got a gateway that came from, you know, the ISP, or it's a gateway the customer already bought, you can still do SSID-based NAT using the access point itself to host the DHCP server and do the NAT. So it's a quick, easy way if you want to put certain users, maybe you don't have VLAN-aware switches, you want to put your users of a certain SSID, like a guest SSID, on their own subnet, you can do that using that function there. It's not true isolation, but it does help create, make it harder for guest users to be able to see and access resources on the main network. Now, if you don't have VLAN aware infrastructure, another feature that we offer for guest networks is layer 2 isolation. So when you enable layer 2 isolation, it basically blocks all traffic outbound except to devices whose MAC address you have manually added to a whitelist. So this prevents users from being able to send traffic or to access any resources on your network unless you have specifically whitelisted it for them. So generally, if this is a guest network, you would put in the MAC address of your gateway to give them access to the internet and nothing else. If you've got like a shared file server or a printer you want guests to have access to, you would add the MAC addresses for those devices to it. And what's going to happen is at the access point level, it will see the client trying to send data. It will see which MAC address that data is being sent to. And if it's not on the whitelist, it will drop that traffic. Now, a key thing here is this is outbound traffic from the clients. It does not filter or block multicast traffic coming in from other devices on the network. So a common problem we run into is people will go and run a scanner on their Wi-Fi connection. And because of multicast broadcast traffic, your print server is broadcasting periodically. Here I am if you want to print something. If you've got smart speakers, they will periodically be broadcasting, hey, I'm a smart speaker. Here's my MAC address. If you want to play music, send it to me. So that traffic will still pass through to the client devices. So the wireless users can see that those devices are on your network. They can see that multicast traffic, but they are unable to send any replies back to those devices. So they cannot access them. So when you're setting up your SSID on the main page there, we do, as long as you've got advanced settings activated, there's just a simple checkbox here for guest network. If you click that, it will automatically enable layer 2 isolation and intra BSS blocking to make it a public hotspot network for you. When it comes to troubleshooting, one of the things our tech support highly recommends is to check out the channel utilization. So you find that by going to devices, access points, and then selecting the access point that may be having issues or that the clients connected to it have been having issues. And one of the things you want to do is mouse over this graph. And you can see then what your channel utilization has been at different points in time. So if you see something with really high channel utilization, that means you may want to change the channel you're using, or you may want to enable the ability for the access point to push users to one of the other radios. Another common area where we run into some issues is with wireless roaming. So what a lot of people don't realize is roaming is not a function of the access point. By the definitions of 802.11, roaming is handled by the client. It is the client device that determines how often it checks to see if there are other access points nearby, and is the client device that determines when it's going to jump from one to another. And the quality of that roaming and the way it behaves can vary greatly from device to device based on, the chipset they're using, the drivers they're using, whichever particular algorithm that particular, hardware wants to use. We get a lot of complaints in particular from Apple users. I think it's gotten better recently, but I know historically that's been one of the biggest complaints is Apple users. Now there is something called assisted roaming that's supposed to help that. And there's something called 802.11r. You can enable those. 802.11r enables fast roaming, and then assisted roaming, which is 802.11k and v, that allows the access point to communicate with the client and sort of push them. But clients don't always support it very well. If they support it at all, it doesn't always work. So there's some things we can do. Now, one of the problems or one of the causes of this behavior is the fact that your client device is often making its decisions solely based on the signal strength that it sees from your access point. And the problem we run into is your Wi-Fi access point may be 200 or 400 milliwatts, or in some cases even 1 watt of output power, but most of your tablets and phones and other mobile devices are at 50 milliwatts or less. So there's a big imbalance between the two. So while your phone may be able to see that access point and pick up signals from it, no problem. Your phone may not be able to send the signal back all the way to the access point. So it doesn't know that the access point isn't carrying its signal, basically. So we have the ability to use the smart steering function in Nebula to try to work around this. So you go to configure access points, and then you go to the radio settings section. You're going to want to enable smart steering. And so what smart steering does is it lets you on a per radio basis set a minimum signal threshold at the access point. So instead of relying on the client device to guess, when the access point can't hear it, the access point gets to say, hey, wait a minute, this signal is too weak from that client device. I'm going to go ahead and kick them off. And the hope here is that if you kick them off of the access point, it will force the client device to scan for new APs and connect to a closer AP than what it is currently connected to. So you can see here, we have the ability to set what that signal threshold is. And we have the ability to be basically how aggressive we want it to be. And so the aggressiveness is basically how many, so we'll kick them off, and then how long before we allow them to reassociate. So the higher it is, basically, the longer it takes before we would allow that client device to reassociate with the same access point again. So as a general rule, there is no hard and fast rule for what these settings should be. It's something that normally requires a site visit and for you to test it and tweak it yourself, just based on what the type of client devices are you're using and what the environment there is like. As a starting point, our sales engineer suggests for the 2.4 gigahertz radio, start with a setting of -69, 5 gigahertz -72, and 6 gigahertz -75. So another cool feature we have in Nebula that tends to get overlooked is the ability to do an automatic VLAN on our switches. We've got two different places we can do this, two different ways we can do this, and this can be found under Configure, Switches, Switch Settings. So basically, the first 6 digits in a MAC address are supposed to be a manufacturer identifier. So what you can do is you can set up rules that when you connect a device to the switch, it looks at what the those first 6 digits are. And if you have set it up, it will automatically assign a certain VLAN to that device based on the MAC address. So that way you don't have to manually track which devices are plugged in on which port and do it on a port basis. So we have two different ways of doing this. The first one here is going to be what we call voice VLAN. So this is probably the most common reason why you would want to do this, right? You want your voice over IP phones to automatically go on a special VLAN that gets the highest priority on your network, because voice over IP, while not bandwidth intensive, is very sensitive to packet delays and packet loss. So what you would do is enable your voice VLAN, and it will show you this screen here. We'll choose Assign VLAN by OUI. That's that first 6 digits. And then we've got a drop-down menu here with a list of all of the most common VoIP manufacturers. And as you can see on this list here, 3Com has a lot of different OUIs, right? So it's a drop-down list. You can go through this drop-down list, find the ones you want to use, and it will automatically detect those devices when you plug them in and put them on their voice LAN. We also have the ability to do a VLAN, not through the voice VLAN functioning, but just as a vendor ID based VLAN. So you can enable that. It works very similar, only with this one here, there is no dropdown. You can manually type in the OUI that you want to use, and you can assign as many of these as you want. And then you can put the VLAN and priority settings for that connected device. So very similar functionality, just two different places to do it. Another one here, we have gotten feedback from our tech support team that generates a lot of calls, is storm control. So storm control is something where we identify a device on your network putting out a large number of packets, and we will generate a log entry that says broadcast storm detected or multicast storm detected. And it's very common on networks for us to get calls from people saying, hey, why do I keep seeing this in my log? What's going on? And at least in our tech support's local tech support's view, the default setting is too low. So the default setting is 100 packets per second. And the challenge you run into here is, if you go to a busy website, especially the modern day Ajax, websites where there's back and forth communication between the website and the web host, just visiting a website may create more than 100 packets that need to be generated. I forget what it is, but like Facebook can generate, I think, like 150 when you first connect to it. So we suggest changing, if that's bugging you, seeing that in your logs, we suggest going into the settings here, configure switches, switch ports, finding those ports, and leave storm control enabled, but change the value here from 100 and upgrade it to 200 or 300 ports per second. Or don't, and just, ignore this. So something I do want to highlight here is earlier this year, we added what they call AI chat into the Nebula interface. And this is available in both the free and the Plus and Pro pack. So you will see it in the chat window in the bottom right of your screen. And basically you open it up, it has a little chat bot where you can ask questions about Nebula. And what I have found is it's very good at finding support notes, links to areas in our documentation where we talk about how to use or configure different settings. So I have found it's a lot easier rather than pulling up the Nebula user guide or the access point user guide and control Fing through it, to simply go to the chat, type in what I'm looking for. It will give me a little explanation. I don't necessarily personally find these all that helpful, but what I do find helpful is it will then create hot links to the sources of where it found that information. So my suggestion when using this is to keep it simple. So in this example here, I wanted to learn about configuring static DHCP. And I find it's just easiest to type in something like static DHCP rather than to, chat GPT it where you type in a big long thing. I have found when you type in something long, this is not chat GPT. It's not that good. It doesn't always understand what you're asking for. So I have found you just type in the keywords for the feature you're looking for, and then I jump straight to the sources and follow those links to find what I need. It's the information's here, but it's hard to read. There's no graphics. It's all clumped together. But if I click on these links, it'll take me to a support note, which has screenshots and explanations and things like that. So I find this very helpful for me when I'm trying to figure out how to configure something, or when I'm trying to understand a feature I've come across in Nebula and I'm not sure how to use it. Type it in here in the chat, follow the links, and it does a pretty good job of getting me to what I need to know. And with that, guys, that is the end of today's presentation. There's no questions that have been sent in. If you do have one, I'll stick around for just a minute, send it in using Q&A there. And if you have some feedback for things in Nebula that have stumped you or caused you confusion, let me know, and we'll think about adding it to future versions of this webinar. So you can contact me via email. It's ShawnR@Zyxel.com. And Shawn is spelled phonetically there. So SHAWN, the letter R, at Zyxel.com. Or you can always just reach out to your salesperson, Andy, Jacob, David, and ask them to pass it on to me. And I'll take a look at it and see if it's something we can add to the presentation going forward. I have no other questions that have come in, so I am going to end today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I hope I see you at one of our next ones.